Now, after seeing Superman in theaters, one thing that has remained sacred in the minds of hardcore fans is the Jor-El turning evil thing. Primarily as a Marvel and Batman fan myself, I unfortunately don't have the luxury to decide whether people are right or wrong about this decision, or even take part on this conversation. Let alone the fact that this take on Clark Kent is now more acquainted with Earth than in Krypton. Now let's start by analyzing, breaking down some recent adaptations. The reason I say this is because normally directors and writers, while fans of the source material that came before, always want to leave their footprint on a new story. The best cases we saw that are with The Last Jedi. So the example that I most cherish in terms of these discussions of how to bring legacy characters into the silver screen again. Now, this is widely considered online as the best legacy sequel Star Wars had, and despite not doing better than The Force Awakens in a box office, you can say that it had a similar effect on people with Endgame, where it's more of an event, a culmination of decades worth of storytelling on a silver screen. The reason it did so well was partially due to Rian Johnson's subjective choices on certain Star Wars tropes. How to balance the failure of not living up to who you are, and to also bring some levity in the film when needed. It's clear that we could address other particularities like Steve Yedlin's cinematography chops that we also saw in Knives Out, and this continued his partnership with Johnson, very prosperous one, and some of the most best cinematic looking movies in terms of investigation. So if you haven't seen Knives Out, I hope you watch it. But in here, I really want you to pay attention to how Luke Skywalker is handled. Sure, some hardcore fans wanted him to spearhead a sequel trilogy, but his send-off touches all the emotional beats and even more required for this movie to work. This version of Luke is a distinct personality due to his maturity, but still remains grounded within the story, and he actually executes his part well. Luke wanted to kill Kylo while training with him in a Jedi temple, thus making him prone to the tragedy and melancholy of his past catching up to him in a revolting manner. Now, fast forward to Superman territory. Superman and Lois really separated itself from the Arrowverse, but they still had the same origin story of Krypton dying. They didn't explicitly mention it all the time, sometimes in crossovers in terms of referencing that moment where Jor-El and his wife give up the last son of Krypton and send him to Earth, but pretty much it's not going to be the example we're going to tackle now. We really need to go ahead and overview certain recent events and recent iterations of the characters, not in terms of comics, but of course in other mediums such as animation. And I'm talking about my adventures with Superman. You'll see a situation that is quite similar to what Superman is facing now. Of course, David Corenswet's Superman feels alone. You can see that when he talks how he does about his cousin's dog probably being scared somewhere else outside his familiar patronage. Of course, this is the point on the film where Lex Luthor is holding Krypto captive. And, fast forward to my adventures with Superman, Jack Quaid's Clark has already 2 seasons and he develops more about Krypton and, the heritage in the 2nd season. And sure, the pacing of an animated series might not be exactly the same as a film, but then we're even in agreement that Superman on the big screen should always tackle Krypton. And regardless of being an origin story or not, pieces of that planet's importance should still be there. Now, James Gunn, in recent interviews, he focused on him being an immigrant, which is, I think, a take that is not very much addressed, especially when we want to ground the Superman film nowadays. And this was weeks before his ballsy choice of making Kal's parents evil and persuading him to storm the Earth, create a secret harem, and values that certainly weren't in his doctrine growing up with Pa and Ma Kent in Smallville. Now, in my adventures with Superman, Jor-El was good, but his image, his message slash hologram was almost corrupted, as in wouldn't be able to spend as much time with Clark to go through Krypton's story. His last vivid memory comes from there, but he still has an heritage he's proud, and afterwards, even a cousin he has to meet. And this is, of course, the plot. I will not spoil too much of it. If you guys want to see that show, I really recommend it. Supergirl is another factor. Now, she pretty much is why I think this change was made. The Woman of Tomorrow inspired film normally should follow Kara, getting revenge for her parents' death. If I'm not mistaken, that's how the Tom King story goes. But obviously we can get some more context on Krypton. But right now, people are theorizing because, of course, it's a Superman film. We really want to know what happens to Krypton. How is Krypton established in this new DC universe, rather than, of course, getting all the answers in the next film. But still, having that in mind, of course, anything can change. But James Gunn sometimes is reluctant because he can't answer too much about how Supergirl knows if Jor-El was evil, how did they coexist with Supergirl's family, etc., etc. So um, it's very, very difficult. Despite having a cousin that's supposedly keeping more heritage and remembering more of your home planet does not make you more of a Kryptonian. It in fact deviates from that, especially when both interact, because there's going to be a difference between those who grew up in the home planet and those who haven't. And I don't think that's the sole reason, though. They really have a typical dysfunctional relationship that's completely normal in terms of family ties, but it's still different in the sense that using the Fortress of Solitude, for example, to explore some experiments that Superman might do in future sequels, as seen in Morrison's All-Star Superman run when he has all of these Kryptonian scientific experiments in the works after, having the knowledge that he's going to die due to the cells that he has that have been deteriorated. What we can see here is potentially he has core strength, and that comes from Earth and his relationships on Earth, but he also has some very noticeable issues that also can be explored in a very intriguing and compelling way, especially when we talk about how this planet is Earth now, and let's say he wants to fight Brainiac or anyone who had a vendetta with the planet, and he puts Superman in an awkward position. His planet is Earth now, and his relationships and acquaintances all stem from there. Not all of this is negative. He can really explore a good, compelling story, James Gunn, with this radical decision. I don't think that takes away from Superman's personality. It puts him in a very complicated spot with Krypton, this relationship on a planet that, your parents were from, but then, of course, that image, that perfect image that you had, that first part of the message is easily swept, and all the good memories and all the great concepts that you grew up with, they're easily stripped away. And especially, exploring your roots in other locations such as Argo City or somewhere else in space related to the planet, or even descendants who might be there, who knows. This can lead us to more answers in the future. So I don't think that, this change particularly, already rips apart the origin story or even this character. It sets in stone a lot of things that Gunn can explore, and a lot of things are in motion now, because there's various theories, there's various ways to go about making it a more meaningful choice as time passes on in the DCU. For people saying that this can be easily swept under the rug, I don't think this is a for the man who has everything situation. This was a comic, although it was just in a dream. This is a comic that happened, of course, in the 20th century. And Krypton has also been deemed a repressive planet before, not only in the comics in the 80s, but in the Krypton live-action series, Zod was on the verge of domination. He was corrupted by Brainiac. So there have been tries in universes where that sits well. Plus, Gunn isn't even adapting from the newer comics. This is something that is more fashioned for the MCU as we enter a silver age of comic book heroes, paying homage to the past, but of course, also giving his fair share of appreciation to the recent source material. This is, of course, talking about the Hickman runs, the Ultimate issues that have grown popularity in the last decade. Then again, the fact that this first message of the parents wasn't at all threatening leads me to believe that they are not all fire and smoke, and reasonably were perhaps panicking of losing Krypton heritage. Still, you don't really justify the gruesome demands of, creating a secret harem. And this pretty much also creates another situation. What if there was another descendant that were to escape? Would he have done this to another planet had he heard the full message? So there's a lot of possibilities. It can even be, Elseworld projects along the line if DCU comes strong and actually develops into something beautiful, even bigger than the MCU. You can see shows like What If type that can explore past moments of the DCU. Maybe this can be tackled in a different way. And the Jor-El change brings more questions about this adaptation, but it also, these questions can be easily flipped into plot points all the time. So I think that Superman was a great movie overall. Despite the changes, I think that, of course, people had some complaints in terms of being overstuffed with new characters, probably setting up too much despite not wanting to set up too much. But still, the Justice Gang portrayed a very interesting role in that movie. I really did not have any problems with this, but I saw a lot of people discussing about it online, and I really think that is interesting, especially to put in perspective all what the DCU can deliver, especially when we saw how Superman was treated as a character by James Gunn. I think the personality was accurately depicted, faithfully. It was a good adaptation. But of course, hardcore fans will have their fair share of doubts. But I think that looking forward to the future should be the way in which we can cope with some of these issues.